Grand Central smelled like wet wool and impatience. Mara Alvarez spotted her ex-husband by the departures board. Iron blue suit, the same entitled tilt of his chin, scanning faces as if the whole terminal owed him something. Panic buckled her knees. On instinct, she stepped toward the nearest tall stranger in a charcoal coat and said, "Please, pretend you know me." He looked down with steady, gray eyes. Then he opened his arms, and she folded into them. His cologne was cedar and winter. "There you are," he murmured, loud enough for Colin to hear. Fingers grazed the back of her head like a shield. "You're safe. I've got you." Afterward, she remembered the noise first. The scrape of a rolling suitcase. The metallic shout of a conductor. The holy hush inside a stranger's coat when the world outside was cold and ugly. "Keep walking," he said. "Left." Mara breathed through a throat gone tight and let him steer her. His hand didn't clutch. It guided, 2 fingers at the small of her back. The stranger angled his body to block her from view as they wove past a pastry kiosk, then down a side corridor that smelled of bleach and pretzels. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Colin Reeves, ex-husband, ex-dream, ex-life, stood on his toes, scanning the crowd, mouth thin with irritation. "Thank you," she said to the stranger, once a marble pillar hid them. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do. Don't apologize." He was taller, up close, with a quiet, contained energy, like a building with its own generator. His hair, dark, clipped, left no room for accident. "Do you need to call someone?" Mara swallowed. She had no one to call. Her sister in Houston would worry. Her closest friend, Priya, was at the hospital on a 12-hour shift. "No, I'm okay. Thank you." A beat. "He won't follow you here," the stranger said. "You want me to walk you to the Lexington entrance?" Her cheeks stung as adrenaline drained. "I don't want to get you involved. Bit late for that?" His mouth ticked, almost a smile. "Come on, the rain's turned to a mood." Outside, Lexington Avenue was a black ribbon of cabs. The morning had shaken the color out of the city. Buildings sulked under a sky like wet paper. He motioned, and a matte black SUV glided to the curb with the obedience of a trained dog. A driver in a cap hopped out, umbrella sprung. "I can't," Mara said automatically. "You can," the stranger said, as if correcting a simple miscalculation. "At least for a few blocks. Safer than the street." He said it so simply, safer, that she obeyed. Inside, heat softened her damp clothes, and the city became a muted watercolor through the tinted glass. She realized then that she'd left a print on his coat, a crescent of makeup near the lapel. Mortified, she tugged a tissue from her tote. "I'll cover the dry cleaning," she blurted. "It's fine." He brushed the mark with a thumb and, just briefly, looked amused. "Where to?" "East 83rd, she hesitated. "Between 2nd and York." His eyes flicked. Something assessing and impersonal turned curious. "You live near Carl Schurz. Walk there sometimes. Me too." He said it like confession, and then didn't fill the silence with small talk. She liked that. She liked absurdly that he didn't ask her name, her story, her why. The SUV moved like a whisper. Her heart settled into a reasonable rhythm. On 83rd, when the car eased to a stop, she reached for the door. "Thank you." She meant it like a benediction. "If he bothers you again," the stranger said, "call me." He slid a card from an inner pocket, the weight of it a small surprise in her palm. Heavy paper. Embossed. No title. Just a name. Daniel Whitaker. And a number. Her gaze snagged on the name, a flicker of familiarity like a song half-remembered. But he'd already tapped the glass. The driver stepped out with the umbrella. "Be well, miss," he began. "Mara, she said, stepping onto the sidewalk that smelled of wet stone and coffee. Mara Alvarez. Daniel nodded once. Take care, Ms. Alvarez. The SUV softened back into traffic. She stood on the wet stoop with his card pressed to her skin like a heat pack, and the strange certainty that the day had shifted on its axis. Somewhere below the surface, the city clicked into a new gear. Upstairs, her one-bedroom was warming toward the smell of radiator dust. She shrugged off her coat, kicked off shoes, and only then set his card on her chipped thrift store table. The name kept pulling at her. She opened her laptop. The keys wore the fingerprints of bills paid late and chapters drafted at midnight. She was finishing a part-time degree in counseling at Hunter, answering phones at night for an Upper East Side therapist to keep rent paid. She typed the name, a cascade of results. Whitaker Ventures. Whitaker Group. Boardroom photos that made him look colder than he had in person. Headlines about a tech acquisition, a philanthropy gala, a profile with a sentence she read twice, billionaire heir turned builder. A candid shot. Him at Carl Schurz Park, jeans, an old ball cap, a dog. She flushed with the absurdity of it, and then closed the laptop because her body had started to shake again, a tremor chased by delayed fear and a wash of shame. Panic made you do strange math. You grabbed the nearest narrative that promised a door. A knocking yanked her back. 3 quick, courteous taps. She froze. The second set of taps, slightly louder, made her move. She peered through the peephole. Priya, her hair plastered to her cheeks, held a carton of soup and a familiar impatience. Open. I texted. You're apparently in a tunnel where messages die. Mara let her in, relief like warmth. Priya set the soup on the stove, then took in the room with quick triage eyes, damp coat, trembling hands, card on the table. Bad morning, Priya said gently. Mara told her, halting at first, and then in a rush that tasted like metal. The hug, the corridor, the card, the late revelation that the stranger she'd clung to like a lifeline had the net worth of a small republic. Priya whistled, low. You hugged Daniel Whitaker in Grand Central to avoid your ex. New York, baby. It wasn't a meet-cute, Mara said flatly. No. Priya's brown eyes softened. But it might be a lifeline. Has Colin been around? He filed a motion to modify alimony, Mara said, anger a clean note at last, to get out of paying what the court ordered. He says I don't deserve it because I left a secure marriage. Priya made a sympathetic noise and ladled soup. You didn't leave a marriage. You left a roped-off museum where only his portrait hung. Mara smiled, small. They ate. Outside, the rain freshened. When Priya left, the apartment felt less haunted. She washed the bowl, wiped the counter, and, just once, traced the embossed letters on the card. She didn't plan to call him. By nightfall, plans had become theoretical. A gray sedan idled across the street longer than made sense. A figure in a hood loitered under the scaffolding, texting with intent. When she took her trash down, a voice behind her said, almost gently, You're hard to reach. Colin. He had the look of a man who believed his time was always being stolen. You can't avoid me, he said, as if reading the law. I left you messages. You left threats, she said, steadying her breath. And I'm done being an echo of your wants. He laughed, soft. I'm renegotiating alimony, and your lawyer, if you still have one, will discover that I have a very good reason to revisit the terms. What reason? The whine of a radiator was a high, desperate sound. Because you've been living with a man. His smile held courthouse teeth. A very wealthy man. What? She blinked. What are you? I have eyes, he said, and sources. A misread, she thought. A lie. But the gray sedan across the street rolled down its window, just a notch, and a camera lens glinted. Her gut dropped. The hug. The SUV. The umbrella. Panic made new math. Old rules stopped applying. She climbed the stairs on rubber legs, shut her door carefully, and sat at the table. The card waited, innocent and heavy. She called. He answered on the second ring. "Whitaker." "Mara," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "From this morning. I wouldn't call, but I think I've complicated your life." "Unlikely," he said, but not unkind. "What happened?" She told him. The gray sedan, the camera, Colin's insinuation. On the other end of the line, a pause as precise as a cut. "Stay inside," Daniel said, the warmth of command wrapping the words. "I'll send someone." "I don't need—" "It's raining," he said, and she could almost hear the lift of one eyebrow. "Let me be polite." 20 minutes later, politeness knocked in the form of a woman who introduced herself as Nadia, security liaison, with a raincoat and eyes that saw through doors. She swept the hallway once, murmured into a cuff, and then gave Mara a small, approving nod. "You sure you want to stay here tonight?" "I can't afford a hotel," Mara said, biting it back after she'd said it. "You can afford safety." Nadia's mouth softened. "My boss is a complicated man, but he doesn't do half measures." Mara packed a tote in baffled silence. Leggings, a sweater, her battered copy of The Body Keeps the Score. On the curb, the black SUV again, inevitable as a tide. The city slid by in a hush. When they pulled under the awning of a building in Tribeca with doormen like sentinels, she felt her shoulders tighten without permission. The elevator delivered them to a floor where there was no decision to be made about which door to knock on. There was only one. Inside, a foyer of cool stone and warm light. A window longer than her apartment. A quiet thrumming, she realized, was the sound of wealth. HVAC systems that were perfectly calibrated. Art that absorbed sound better than drapes. Daniel waited near a low, broad sofa, as if he had been there all day, which he had not. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, and a smile moved through his face like a small thaw. "You look less terrified than this morning." "Practice," she said. He gestured to the sofa. Water arrived, then tea, then food she didn't know she wanted until it sat in front of her in small bowls. Sliced pears, salted almonds, a folded omelet. He didn't talk until she was eating. She missed that until she realized it had relaxed her. "I can help," he said when she set the fork down. "But I should be transparent about my motives." "Do you have motives?" she said, disbelieving. "Always," he said without pride. "I'm a public man, and the public part of my life is untidy this week." He picked up a remote and flicked on a wall-mounted screen. A scrolling finance channel showed a Chiron. Whitaker Group eyes bid for Vestratech after regulatory stumble. Beside it, a grainy photo of Daniel at a gala with a woman in a metallic dress. The caption, all smirk. "Billionaire bachelor back on the market?" "I'm buying a company whose leadership fumbled compliance," he said. "The optics aren't great. The price is right. But shareholders are skittish. The press is circling with their usual narratives. Greed, arrogance, a man who collects assets as if they were charms. Are they wrong?" It came out sharper than she intended. He seemed amused, not offended. "Some days. Today, I'm trying to rescue an engineering division from idiots in suits." "And where do I come in?" she asked, a knot forming. "The photo at Grand Central will surface," he said, pragmatic as a weather forecast. "If it does, the narrative will tilt toward secret woman. I prefer a different story. Something honest enough to make us both comfortable and clean enough to calm sharks." He folded his hands. "Will you pretend to be my girlfriend for 6 weeks?" Mara's laugh was a small, breaking thing. "You're joking." "No." He tilted his head. "In exchange, comprehensive security for you. A legal team that will ensure Mr. Reeves learns to spell the word boundaries, and a donation to a non-profit of your choice." "What about me?" she asked, an old scar flaring. "Not my causes. Me." He didn't flinch. "We'll pay you. For your time and inconvenience. It will be taxable, legal, and decently boring. You're offering to rent my life. Borrow your presence, he corrected, as a shield, and perhaps as a mirror. Of what? The sort of man I say I am? His expression didn't change, but something in him did. Someone who values people more than deals. I know how that sounds. It's still true. Mara rubbed the heel of her hand against the tight place under her collarbone. 6 weeks. A fake romance. The world's worst rom-com and an ironclad contract. She thought of the gray sedan, of Colin's voice. You're hard to reach. Of the split-second decision to step into a stranger's arms because they felt like a door. Why me? She asked finally. You could hire a model. I could, he said, but I'd like someone whose life doesn't orbit mine. And the power imbalance? She said. She'd promised herself, name the thing. Drag it into light. It exists, he said, simple as gravity. We can only manage it by not pretending otherwise. And if I say no? Then I'll still pay for your security for a week, he said, softening the words. Because this, he gestured at the screen, exacerbates your problem. My presence did that. I'm responsible. She looked past him at the city, windows stacked like lit books, people making dinners, taking showers, texting apologies. 6 weeks. The money could finish her degree. It could break her from the part-time triage of survival. But he was right. It would also pull her into his orbit with tides she couldn't predict. I want a lawyer, she said. Good, he said, and a pleased surprise warmed the syllable. My counsel will recommend you hire your own. I can suggest names or... I'll ask mine, she said. She's stubborn. Excellent, he said, and his smile this time felt like a small approval, not of her compliance but of her spine. Later, after the lawyers and the draft contract with its neat bulleted scope, public appearances, no physical expectations, exit clause, after Nadia walked her through a security plan that made her feel like a dignitary and a target, after she texted Priya a photo of a clause about boundaries and consent and received 5 heart emojis and 1 skull, Daniel walked her to the elevator. It's late, he said. It is. We'll meet the press at the Carl Schurz dog run tomorrow, he said dry. It will look casual. You can bring your book. I don't have a dog, she said. I have one, he said. Borrow his presence. You rent? She said, and then surprised herself by smiling. Borrow, he said, serious again. 6 weeks. If it's too much, the exit clause is real. Why does it feel like you've done this before? She asked. He considered it. Because I've had to manage people's imagination my entire adult life, he said. This is a boundary, not a game. When the elevator doors closed, she watched his expression through the narrowing slit. Composed, faintly tired, and, just for a second, as the doors kissed shut, lonely. In the guest room, the sheets smelled of something botanical and expensive. She lay awake, tracing the line between safety and compromise, until the rain softened into sleep. New York cleaned itself overnight, the sidewalks scrubbed to anonymity by the rain. Mara dressed in jeans and a navy sweater and braided her hair the way she did when she needed a nearly invisible armor. Downstairs, Nadia handed her a coffee and a tiny earpiece. Just for the walk-in, she said. Press loves to appear casual and surprise you with organization. Like a second-grade talent show, Mara murmured. Nadia laughed, surprise brightening her pragmatic face. You'll be fine. Outside, the morning had a shy blue to it. The park smelled like wet bark and cold iron. They met Daniel by the east gate, the river dull and pewter behind him. He wore a windbreaker, a baseball cap, and an ease that felt practiced and almost genuine. At his heel, a lanky, dignified mutt of uncertain heritage sat as if he had applied for the role of dog and gotten it on the first audition. This is Gus, Daniel said. Technically Augustus Whitaker, but he responds to snacks and the sound of my shoes. Gus looked at Mara as if appraising her resume. She offered a hand. He sniffed, then leaned in, the canine equivalent of an endorsement. Good, Daniel said quietly, as if she had passed a checkpoint. Ground rules? Honesty, within the frame, she said, and lifted an eyebrow. Exactly. His gaze flicked towards the path where a cluster of people with cameras moved like a low tide. Let's walk. The press materialized with polite aggression, a chorus of names and questions. Mr. Whitaker, are you buying Vestratech for parts or people? Who's your friend? Ms. Alvarez, how did you meet? The use of her name, God they already knew, sent a cold ribbon down her spine. Daniel's hand hovered near her back, a warning and a promise not to touch without permission. He smiled the way men in power have learned to smile. Brief, spontaneous by design. Good morning, he said. This is Mara. We met in the most New York way possible, in a hurry. Laughter. Flash. She swallowed, tasted the film of performance, and decided in that second to be artful with the truth. Rush hour is democracy, she said, voice steady. Everyone is late. Everyone is carrying something heavy. A pause, the good kind, before a chuckle went through the group. Cameras clicked. Are you dating? Someone lobbed it like a slow ball. We're spending time together, Daniel said. We enjoy each other's company. She heard the restraint in the language, the careful distance of enjoy, and supplied the necessary heat. He makes a decent omelet, she offered. Gus is the better conversationalist. This got the laugh Daniel wanted. The question shifted to deals and compliance and philanthropy, and Mara felt herself drift to the edge of the frame, relief like shade. She watched Daniel do his work, answer precisely, deflect gently, admit imperfections where they cost him least. It was a choreography of power, and she hated that she admired the craft. When they had done enough smiling and nodding to satisfy the news cycle, they cut toward the quieter path by the river. Daniel relaxed by degrees, as if unspooling a measured length of thread. You were good, he said. I told the truth, she said, inside the frame. He nodded, acknowledging the echo. They walked in companionable silence for a minute. A toddler in a yellow raincoat toddled past, starstruck by Gus, whose gravitas dissolved under sticky fingers. I have an appointment, Daniel said finally. Nadia will bring you by the office at noon. There's a charity meeting I'd like you to sit in on. We make a grant decision today, and I'd like eyes that don't calculate upside by reflex. You want me to be a conscience? She said, skeptical and not entirely unflattered. I want you to be a person, he said. There are usually too many roles in those rooms and not enough people. At Whitaker Group's Midtown headquarters, glass and light married in expensive, tidy ways. The conference room held a dozen people who looked well-rested in the manner of those who could schedule rest. A woman with sharp cheekbones and a Prada notebook, Lila Moreno, head of communications, smiled at Mara with the warmth of a ring light. Welcome, she said, as if welcoming a new product line. Ms. Alvarez is a guest, Daniel said, tone making it clear she was not a prop. Lila's smile stayed fixed, professional and unreadable. The agenda was a grin of bullet points. 3 nonprofits vied for a sizable grant: a coding boot camp for undocumented youth, a domestic violence legal aid network, and an arts education collective in the Bronx. The CFO, an elegant man named Arthur Lynn, spoke in a smooth monotone about measurable outcomes. Lila talked about stories. Daniel listened. Mara did too. When the discussion turned to brand alignment, something in her bristled, and she felt Nadia's gaze flicker to her as if sensing heat. Ms. Alvarez, Daniel said, catching the current, you have a thought. She did. She didn't want to voice it in a room designed to reward sleekness. But she had promised herself after the divorce to choose bravery over tidiness, at least once a day. You can measure exits and placement rates, she said, nodding toward Arthur. You can measure impressions and engagement, she added to Lila. But there's something else. Which of these does the most to make a person feel like a person again? Silence. The kind that pulls chairs a half-inch closer to the table. I volunteered with the Legal Aid Network after I left my marriage, she said, qualifying truth with a soft cover. They didn't treat me like a case. They treated me like a person with a future. I might be biased. Lila's gaze sharpened. Arthur checked a document with a pen's click that sounded like punctuation. Daniel took a breath. We'll split the grant, he said, a decision landing. 50% to the legal network, 25 each to the other two, with a commitment to revisit in 6 months. Arthur frowned, elegant and small. We lose leverage with a split. Daniel looked at Mara. We gain people, he said, and then turned to Arthur. Find leverage somewhere else. After the meeting, Lila intercepted Mara with a vowel-stretching warmth. You were compelling, human. We'll schedule a profile for next week. Something about your work, your studies, how you met, what you value. The internet is a machine that chews and chews. We must feed it or it bites. Mara smiled carefully. I'll check my schedule with Nadia. Lila's lashes did a polite flutter. Of course. On the elevator down, Mara exhaled and leaned back. Do your people like you? She asked Daniel. They respect me, he said without irony. Liking is not a KPI. What about being liked by me? She asked, challenging before she could stop herself. He turned to her, expression unreadable and interesting. Not a KPI, he said, but important. She hated, again, that honesty felt good. That evening, Priya came over with Thai food, and a squeal so high it clipped the edges of sound. You made a speech in a billionaire's conference room, she said, around a mouthful of pad CU. And didn't die. I may yet, Mara said. Lila has plans to feed me to the internet machine. They debriefed in couch comfort, noodles and sarcasm soothing as a balm. Priya's pager vibrated. She groaned, stood, kissed the top of Mara's head. I am proud of you, she said, for making boundaries and then filling them with your actual self. After Priya left, Mara sat on the window ledge and watched lights blink on across the city. 6 weeks, she reminded herself. A contract, a frame. But the day had shifted something in the geometry between them. He had invited her into a room and let her opinion cost him something. She felt the slow, dangerous warmth of gratitude. She turned the thought so it caught the light. That's where the slide begins, she warned herself. Gratitude, then obligation, then confusion about which belongs to whom. Down the hall she heard Daniel's voice low on the phone. We'll make the bid tomorrow, he said, weary under control. And if Reeves is advising Vestra's board, we'll do it with more patience than he deserves. Mara went still. Reeves. She slid down the wall until she sat on the cool floor, the word like a bell ringing the past awake. In her mouth, the taste of pennies. The next morning, Mara drank coffee that tasted like competence and confronted Daniel in the kitchen, which, unlike him, was entirely knowable. Knives arranged by size, a bowl of lemons trying hard to look casual. Reeves, she said. Daniel grunted in a way that could mean many things. Yes, my ex-husband, she said, as if he did not already know. I know, he said, without flourish. My people ran a standard due diligence on anyone connected to you with press risk. Reeves advises Vestratech's board through his fund. A small heat pulsed behind her eyes. You didn't think to mention that the man I hid from in a train station is working on the other side of your biggest deal? I didn't because I had not yet decided what to do about it, he said, voice like a measured pour. I needed to decide whether to recuse myself from the bid, change counsel, or keep me close, she said, more acid than she intended. He didn't flinch. Or keep you safe. Those might be the same thing, she said, heart beating fast enough to bruise ribs. Yes, he said, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Mara set the coffee down. The ceramic thunk sounded like an argument. I don't want to be a pawn you move to corner him. He studied her. A long, quiet assessment that didn't feel like a search for advantage, so much as a search for language. I won't use you, he said finally. Not for this. Not for anything. If you think I am, we end the contract today. She held his gaze until her own steadied. Okay, she said, because she believed him, and because believing him frightened her more than she wanted to admit. The day became a lattice of tasks, fittings for 2 charity dinners. Wear something that feels like you, not like a mannequin, Lila coached, ironic in a room full of gowns built for mannequins. A short interview with a business podcast. We met in the rain, she said, telling the narrow truth. A check-in with her academic advisor about extending a deadline by a week. Personal circumstances, she said, and the woman's face softened, as if a private grief had made her fluent in that dialect. In the afternoon, Nadia shepherded her to a therapy appointment she was frankly astonished to find on her calendar. I didn't schedule this, she said. I did, Nadia said. With your permission in the contract. High-profile situations create stress. Therapy is part of your security detail. Mara laughed, short and bright. I like you. Her therapist, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Scott, with a calm voice and an office that understood the uses of texture, invited her to sit, and then said very little for the first 10 minutes. Mara filled the silence with the story. The hug, the offer, the contract, the deal, the ex. And what do you want? Dr. Scott asked, when the word count slowed. To be the person I am when I'm not scared, Mara said, surprising herself. And not to confuse gratitude with love. Dr. Scott smiled, small and approving. That's a clean sentence. Everything else is messy, Mara said. Good, Dr. Scott said. Mess means you're not simplifying yourself to survive. Outside the building, a man with a camera took 3 quick shots and then pretended to study a tree. Mara's skin crawled. Nadia stepped in his line of sight, calm as gravity. Back off, she said. The man did. That evening, they attended a fundraiser for the Legal Aid Network. The ballroom glittered in a way that felt like a discordant chord against the stories in the air. Women who had packed bags in the middle of the night, men who had left quietly because shame can be a barbed wire in the gut. Daniel spoke briefly, concise, donor-friendly. Mara felt a strange tug at his restraint. She wanted him to be more, to risk saying something with a cost. The thought startled her. You barely know him. You want him to bleed his edges in public? After his speech, a woman with a journalist's posture approached. Jordan Pike, she said. Feature writer. I'm doing a piece on corporate philanthropy. Daniel's smile had edges softened for public consumption. Of course, Jordan's eyes slid to Mara. And you are the surprise narrative, she said, not unkind. The woman who met the billionaire at rush hour. Or, Mara said lightly, the woman the billionaire met at rush hour. Jordan's smile acknowledged the edit. Would you talk to me sometime, off the record, to start? About what? Mara asked, wary. About what it costs to be adjacent to power, Jordan said, and what it buys. Mara filed the question like a shard of glass in a pocket, useful for cutting ropes, dangerous for fingers. At the coat check, Colin appeared as if conjured by the word cost. He didn't look at her so much as past her, as if studying the idea of her. Mara, he said, smooth as a new blade. You look well fed. Daniel stepped close enough to rearrange the air. Mr. Reeves, he said. Ah. Colin's smile relocated to his eyes and died there. Your boyfriend. Her date, Daniel corrected. His tone was polite, tuned to a frequency of warning only certain men heard. You work for Vestra, Mara said to Colin, taking a step so Daniel no longer stood between them. Is that why you've been sniffing around my life? Because the proximity makes you feel larger? Colin's mouth twitched. I'm concerned for you. This performance will end. and he will drop you." "And what will you have then?" "Myself," she said, and felt her spine align to its old coordinates. "Which is more than I had with you." A faint flush climbed Colin's neck. Rage always colored him like wine-staining napkins. "Enjoy your puppetry," he said, and turned on a heel that wanted applause. In the car, Daniel was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't fear silence. Mara finally exhaled. "Thank you for not speaking for me," she said. "I've been spoken for," he said, looking out at the city. "It makes you smaller in your own head." "Who did it to you?" she asked, before she could stuff the question back down. "Everyone," he said, with a little shrug. "The trust lawyers at 22, the board at 28, the press since forever. I built rooms where I could speak and mean it." He looked at her. "That's what I'm doing now." "Buying a company," she said. "And building a room," he said, "where engineers get to mean what they build." That night, sleep finally came without teeth. But at 2 a.m., her phone shivered. A message from an unknown number. "You'll never win. He'll leave you, and I'll still be here." Attached, a photo of Mara and Daniel at the dog park, his hand hovering near her back, her face mid-laugh. The shot so close it felt like an intrusion into a private muscles movement. She texted it to Nadia. "Got it," Nadia wrote back. "We're tracking the number. Do not reply." Mara didn't, but she lay awake and watched the city until it grew new edges and the sky thinned. The Vestratech bid leaked like all things meant to be secret. Markets did a jittering dance. Lila's team ran interference like a rugby line. Daniel disappeared into rooms where daylight was a guest, not a resident. Mara rehearsed a life that was not quite hers. Fittings, fundraisers, the choreography of arriving and leaving at times that looked unplanned. In the eddies between obligation, their private world developed its own weather. She learned he drank his coffee black and hot, like a decision, that he preferred old jazz while reading term sheets, that he loved Gus with a tenderness that made something in her chest unclench. He learned she sang along to bad 90s pop while doing dishes, that she slept with socks on even in June, that she could find a bench in any park that felt like a confession booth. They were careful. The contract's boundaries were real and observed. But intimacy creeps in through small cracks, shared quiet, mutual competence, the way a person sets a glass down. One afternoon, a storm pinned them inside. Thunder leaned on the city. Rain wrote angry cursive on the windows. Mara worked at the kitchen table on a paper about trauma-informed practice. Daniel stalked a conference call around the living room, throwing sentences at a speakerphone that replied in measured platitudes. When he hung up, he looked as if the weather had moved inside his head. "Bad?" she asked. "Annoying," he said. "Reeves is telling Vestra's board I plan to carve up their engineering team and sell it for parts. He's playing the savior." His mouth soured. "He's good at narrating his interests as moral imperatives." Mara stapled her paper, aligning the edges as if that could impose order on a day. "He was always good at shaping story," she said. "Our wedding vows were bullet points disguised as poetry." Daniel glanced over. "Why did you marry him?" "Because he loved the idea of me," she said, honest through the storm. "And I thought that would someday become the real me. It didn't." She smoothed the stapled corner. "Why aren't you married?" "I fell in love with building," he said, "and it loved me back enough to ruin compatibility with mortals." "Sounds lonely," she said, soft. "Sometimes," he admitted. A crack of lightning lifted the room like a flashbulb. Gus snarled at the window as if he could fight weather. Daniel rubbed his head. "We're attending a dinner tomorrow with Vestra's independent directors," he said. "It'll be at Altana on Perry Street. Small, civilized, and laden with unspoken knives. I need you there." "As a shield," she said. "As myself," he said, meeting her eyes. "You remind me to speak like a person." The dinner was everything he promised. A sanctified rectangle of linen, wine poured at the temperature of old money, smiles that showed teeth. The directors asked polite, precise questions designed to measure whose air they would breathe if they took the bid. Daniel answered with a calm that could be mistaken for indifference if you didn't notice his hands. A stillness so deliberate, it was a tell. Halfway through the halibut, one director asked, "How do we know you'll honor the engineer's work?" Daniel opened his mouth. Mara felt the answer he intended, balanced, data-backed, assemble in the air. She placed her hand on his forearm, a small pressure like a paperweight on a foolish memo. He closed his mouth. He looked at her. She held the look. Then he said, "Because the first thing I built, and the only thing I truly love that isn't human, is an engine." He told them about his college project, a thing of moving parts and furious hope, that worked once on a table at 2 a.m. and made him cry in an empty lab. He told them how he'd felt when executives destroyed something he worked on for profit that year, and how he vowed to never, if he could help it, let a page of accounting ruin a page of code again. The table changed temperature. The directors, who had swallowed narratives about evil billionaires and idiot engineers their whole careers, recalibrated, a centimeter toward trust. After dessert, they walked under string lights and the kind of stars that managed to survive New York. "You did that," Daniel said without looking at her. "I didn't say anything," she said. "You told me to, with your hand." He looked down at her hand, still on his arm. Neither of them moved. The air around the contact thickened in the exact way the contract told them to avoid. She pulled back. "We're careful," she said, to remind herself more than him. "We are," he said, and he sounded like a man in a room with a closed door, listening to what's on the other side. The next morning, the internet chewed again. A blog ran a piece about the billionaire's mystery girlfriend, using photos that made her look brittle and cool. The comments were a collection of bad manners. Her inbox became a museum of men's imagined entitlement, offers, insults, threats. One message in particular: "I know what you did at Hunter." No elaboration, just enough poison to curdle milk. She forwarded it to Nadia, who replied, "We're on it." Then she forwarded it to Jordan Pike, who wrote back, "Let's talk." They met for coffee in a quiet shop near Union Square that smelled like roasted solvents and ambition. Jordan didn't take out a recorder. "I won't quote you without consent," she said. "Off the record means off." "Why do you care?" Mara asked, genuinely curious. "Because the stories we tell about women around power always rot at the same angle," Jordan said. "And because corruption loves romance as a cover." "Are you implying he's corrupt?" Mara asked, a protective thing rising. "I'm implying the incentives are," Jordan said. "He may be the exception. I'd like to find out. And I'd like to know what it costs you to help him be one." Mara sipped coffee and tasted a possible ally with her own agenda. Useful and dangerous. "If I learn something ugly," she said, "I'll tell you." Jordan nodded, eyes steady. "And if I learn something ugly, I'll tell you before I print it." They shook on it because they were both old-fashioned in ways that mattered. When Mara left, a drizzle had started up again, the city perpetually washing its face. That evening, Daniel found her on the roof terrace, the skyline a row of teeth at the horizon. "We got the signal," he said, a rare softness in his voice. "Vestra's board prefers our bid, if the independent directors hold." "That's good," she said. "It is." He studied her profile. "You're quiet." "I'm measuring costs," she said. "For you?" "For everyone," she said, because it was true, and because it made her feel less like a person leaning toward an open door she wasn't supposed to walk through. "May I ask something?" he said. "You may." "Is there a version of this where you and I meet without emergency and contracts and rooms full of knives?" She laughed, surprised by the ache in it. "You at the dog run in a baseball cap, me reading. Gus decides I'm acceptable and drops a ball at my feet. You apologize for his pushiness. I say your apology is unnecessary. It's the dog who has wronged me. We talk about old jazz and cheap noodles. 6 weeks later, you ask if I will let you know when you run out of coffee so you can bring some on your way back from the office. He looked at her as if memorizing that small, believable film. Good, he said. I'll keep that version somewhere safe. Keep the coffee, she said, and they both smiled. And the smile hurt. The turn came on a Wednesday with the precise cruelty of midweek. An email leaked, an internal memo from Lila's team to Daniel that read like war plans. At the bottom, a bullet point in polite corporate bulletese. Leverage Ms. Alvarez's narrative, rescue in rain, humanizing effect, to soften regulatory scrutiny. Coordinate paparazzi placements in low-conflict settings. Dog park, farmer's market. Coach on relatable anecdotes. Student loans, sister in Houston. The internet ate it like sugar. Mara read it standing in the kitchen, her hands turning cold from the inside out. Her sister's name on a memo. Her life itemized as a set of levers. Daniel arrived 2 minutes after Nadia, which meant he'd run. He looked at Mara, then at the open laptop, then at Nadia with a question that could kill careers. Nadia nodded. Tiny. Real, she said. I didn't know, Daniel began. That this memo existed? Mara asked, voice oddly quiet. Or that the machine you built eats people and calls it strategy? He flinched as if she'd slapped him. I knew we planned. I didn't know they used your sister's name like a prop. I didn't know they recommended tipping off photographers like we're staging an accident. Except we are, she said. An accident that makes you look good, and me look like a woman auditioning for a life everyone thinks I'm not qualified to want. Daniel turned to Lila, who had arrived with the rapid exactness of a crisis manager. You wrote this. My team did, she said composed. With my oversight. You used Ms. Alvarez's family, Daniel said, a stillness in him that scared Mara more than yelling would have. You proposed managing strangers to photograph her. You turned her life into a checklist. Lila didn't blink. We're protecting the company, the board, you, her, incidentally. Incidentally, Mara repeated, the word welling poison. I am not incidental to myself. Lila's nostrils flared. Finally, a crack. Ms. Alvarez, with respect, this is how the sausage is made. You accepted the contract. And I assumed you were not butchers, Mara said. Daniel's voice went very quiet. You're fired, he said to Lila. Lila's mouth actually fell open, then it shut, like a trap. You can't. I just did, he said, and it wasn't a performance. Arthur will handle the transition. HR will process your package. You have 20 minutes to collect your things. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry I built a room where you thought this was how we do things. Lila left with a grace that did not touch her eyes. The apartment felt abruptly larger, like a lung after a cough. Daniel turned back to Mara. I am sorry, he said. I can undo a hire with a sentence. I can't undo the harm with one. Good, she said, anger pulsing into clarity. Then don't try to fix me. Fix the machine. He nodded, then hesitated, then reached, stopped. May I sit? He asked, fragile as a person who knows he does not have a right to anything. She gestured to the chair. He sat. I fell in love with building rooms, he said, and I forgot that rooms become houses and houses become cities, and cities learn to eat in certain ways. I let the city learn wrong. Mara listened. She could feel the pendulum inside her swing, from the clean brightness of fury to the knotted ache of something like pity. Reject that, she told herself. Pity is a cousin of capitulation. But the human part of him, the part that fired a person he relied on because that person had itemized Mara's life, cut through defenses she wanted to keep. I need to go, she said, for a while. He nodded once, as if someone had asked if he planned to keep breathing. Where? My place, she said. I want to remember how my own kitchen sounds. He stood. Nadia will... No, she said. I'll manage. He took that like medicine. "I'll send the legal team to file the restraining order against Reeves." "Do that," she said, "and then don't call me." He closed his eyes as if someone had turned off a light. "Okay," he said, voice smaller. "Okay." Her apartment smelled like the memory of lemons, the ghost of the bowl from his kitchen. She opened windows to air out the philanthropy, the strategy, the narratives. She scrubbed the counter with more force than it deserved. She sat on the floor and let herself cry in short, furious bursts that felt like drills cutting through old tile. Priya arrived with wine and a face made for scrapping. "Show me the memo," she said. Mara did. Priya read, then opened her mouth in a scream reserved for elevators and injustice. "I want to fight Lila with a spoon." "Daniel fired her," Mara said. "Good," Priya said, "but he built a world where she knew how to write that. He has to unbuild it." "He said that," Mara said, and hated the thread of defense in her voice. Priya squeezed her knee. "It's okay to love the better version of a man who is trying to exist," she said. "It's also okay to make him become it without you as his tutor." Mara lay on her back and looked at the ceiling, which had always been honest with her. After a while, her phone buzzed. "Jordan." "Saw the memo. I'm writing. Want to go on the record?" Mara stared at the screen. She typed, "Yes, if you print his corrections too. He fired her, and he told me he was wrong." Jordan. "Fair. I'll show you the draft before we run." Mara. "Thank you." The story ran the next morning. When charity meets strategy, the woman in the billionaire's frame speaks. It quoted Mara carefully. It quoted Daniel's apology in full sentences, not PR scraps. It quoted Lila, pissed and polished, from a call that was supposed to be off the record, and clearly wasn't. The internet chewed differently, with thought, with argument. Somewhere in the comment sections, faith and cynicism fought without knives for once. Daniel did not call. Instead, he sent a single email. "I won't try to earn your forgiveness with a performative repair. I'm changing process, not optics. If you want receipts, you'll get them. If you never want to read them, you won't get a single one. I'm sorry." She read it 3 times, as if it were a diagnosis in mercifully plain language. 3 days later, a knock. Nadia, in a rain jacket and that good, steady gaze. "Restraint order's in," she said, "and the number that texted you maps to a burner purchased near Vestra's old offices. Not proof it's Reeves. But the camera guy? He was paid by a PR subcontractor that used to work for Lila. Daniel has frozen contracts with any firm that takes direction from that shop." Mara felt something unclench. "Thank you," she said. Nadia nodded. "Credit where due. He asked me to tell you in person or not at all. He doesn't want to invade your inbox." "Tell him I appreciated the restraint," Mara said. "I'll tell him nothing unless you ask me to," Nadia said, a gentle correction. Mara smiled because boundaries could be a kindness. That night, she slept so hard the city faded out. When she woke, her heart sat differently in her chest. Less like an engine on high idle and more like a clock that had found its correct time. The Vestratech vote approached like weather, then landed like a verdict. Daniel's bid won by a margin that made the markets clap. Reeves went on cable news to look disappointed for the camera and wrathful for the boardroom. Within an hour, the Legal Aid Network's donation page crashed under traffic. Cause and effect are not always poetic, but sometimes they flirt. Mara watched the coverage from her couch, a bowl of cereal in hand. Jordan's article had done damage and repair in equal measure. In the aftermath, Daniel's team released a new policy. No person adjacent to the company would be used as a narrative asset without consent. It read like law, not like aspiration. He sent no flowers, no notes. In the pettiest part of her, she wanted flowers. In the better part, she wanted the absence more. Priya, perched on the arm of the couch, said, "This man is giving you the space you asked for, which is not the same as giving me the version of him I want," Mara said. And they both laughed because wanting is a language that needs humor the way lungs need oxygen. On Friday, Mara walked up to Carl Schurz with a paperback. She sat on the bench she had once told Daniel about, the one that feels like a confession booth, and opened the book, though she did not read. She watched dogs claim the world and people practice dignity, and the river pretend it was always meant to be this color. Gus appeared, trotting like a politician who had learned humility. He dropped a tennis ball at her feet with the gravity of a gift. She laughed, without meaning to. "Where's your person?" she asked. "Contemplating whether he deserves to come over," Daniel said, voice careful and a little hoarse. She looked up. He wore the old ball cap, the one that made him look like the version from the coffee fantasy. He held the posture of a man who came unarmed on purpose. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said, and for a second they both looked at the dog because it was easier. "You did the thing," she said finally. "You changed process." "I did," he said. "I would like to think I would have done it without losing you as a teacher." He paused, but I am not sure that's true. Mara rolled the ball with her shoe. Gus pounced, made an old man noise of delight. "You didn't call. You said not to," he said. "I am learning obedience." "Good," she said, then heard the softness. "I mean good." He sat on the other end of the bench, which had the ergonomics of confession. Enough intimacy to tell the truth, enough distance to prevent heat from making decisions. They watched the river pretend to be still. Finally, Daniel said, "I don't want to borrow your presence anymore." She looked at him, surprised, braces against her heart coming online. No, he said. "I want to ask for it." He let the sentence sit between them until the air around it turned breathable. "No contracts," he said. "No memos, no narrative, just the two of us. Mess appreciated." She felt anger, then fear, then the old scar that says, "Power will always want to own you." And then she heard Dr. Scott's voice in her head. "It's okay to want things. It's okay to require proof." She turned to Daniel and said, "If I say yes, we move slowly. We tell no one with a camera. We do not feed the machine. And when you make a decision that scares me, you tell me before the market does." "I can do that," he said. "What about you?" "I tell you when my fear is about you and when it's about a ghost," she said. "And I tell you when I need to go home and hear my own kitchen." "Okay," he said. And she believed him because believing is a decision you can rescind with cause. They started then, the real beginning, that small and that serious. Coffee on Sundays, Gus as a chaperone, walks at dusk that ended before the hour where mistakes look like fate, a movie in a theater where everyone pretended not to notice them. No photos, no speeches. The work in secret, learning how to want with boundaries on. Colin texted once more. "He'll drop you." She replied, "A judge has your number now. So do my lawyers. Text again, and you'll learn the meanings of consequences." He did not reply. Some ghosts believe in courts. Jordan wrote a follow-up. After the bid, accountability or acting. She called Mara first. "He's made policy," she said, "but policy can be camouflage." "I know," Mara said. "I'm watching." "Do you want me to watch him harder?" Jordan asked, not even pretending to be neutral. "Yes," Mara said, "but watch me too for the ways love makes me stupid." "That's the only assignment I ever wanted," Jordan said, and they both laughed, and the sound felt like something clean. One night, in the quiet hour after the city stopped bragging and before it started worrying, Daniel stood at Mara's sink drying dishes and said, "I told a board today that we would measure our success by how many engineers felt proud to put their names on their work." She smiled at his back. "Good metric." They clapped, he said, a little embarrassed. "I felt something unfasten." She put a plate down and reached for his hand. "Good," she said. "I like you when you unfasten." He turned, and the look on his face moved through her like weather. They kissed. It was not fireworks or cinematic rain. It was two people who had practiced restraint learning how to not. It was warm and slow and a little funny because Gus sneezed like a judgmental uncle, and then sighed, content. They paused. She looked at him. He looked at her. "We are careful," she said out of habit. "We are kind," he said, correcting the verb, "to each other. That will be our rule. You can be careful and still be ambushed." A month into their quiet, someone leaked a draft of the consent policy with track changes that suggested a rollback. It was a nothing burger, an early legal draft, rejected, but the internet did not accept that as a category. "He's backsliding," the headlines implied. Investors sniffed blood. Vestra's engineers, whom Daniel had wooed with talk of names on code, sent him a letter that ended with a sentence that always breaks men in power. "We believed you." Mara read the letter, heart catching. She knew enough now to understand that drafts leak as weapons, but optics could harden into truth if you didn't hammer. She went to the office where the climate controls knew the difference between human heat and server heat, and found Daniel in a glass room that looked like a chapel. "I'm putting out the fire," he said, even before she sat. "I know," she said. "Let me help." He looked at her, and the look was not a man making a calculation. It was a person receiving a gift that cost the giver something. "How?" "Talk to them, not through a memo, in the open, with god-awful fluorescent light on a Friday with stale coffee," she said, as if they're people and not a PR problem. He nodded once, then again. "Stay?" he asked, quiet. "Not on camera," she said. "In the back, with the engineers." He did it. He stood on a crate in a room that smelled like burned dust and old pizza and said, "That draft was trash." The room laughed, a mean kind of love. "We're not rolling back consent," he said. "We're hardening it into governance. If I fail you, you'll have a process to remove me from any decision that touches it." An engineer near Mara muttered, "He's good." Another said, "He's trying." A third said, "I'll believe it when my code gets shipped with my name and not the company's." Mara filed them as archetypes. The skeptic, the pragmatist, the wound. Daniel took questions for an hour. He did not deflect. He did not pretend to be surprised by their anger. He made a joke about stale coffee, and then promised better coffee, and then corrected himself, and promised better governance, which is, in tech, as rare as good coffee. After, Mara lingered. A woman with a sleeve of tattoos said, "You're the girlfriend." "I'm a person," Mara said, smiling. The woman grinned, not at all offended. "He looks at you like a lifeline," she said, casual. "Don't let him use you as one." "I won't," Mara said, filing the sentence as a vow. On the way out, Daniel said, "You saved me today." She shook her head. "You saved yourself by not lying." "That's the same thing," he said. "Lying would have been easier." "Easier is how we lose the person we wanted to be," she said. He looked at her like that again. The look that felt like a shared country. "I keep wanting to tell you I love you in rooms with other people in them," he blurted, then laughed at himself. "Which seems like a disadvantage." "It's a disadvantage if the person doesn't say it back," she said, and the air went thick with hope. She didn't say it back. Not then. She tucked the moment into the same drawer as the baseball cap fantasy. Later, on a bench. Later, when she wasn't blinking sweat out of her eyes from a room full of fluorescent honesty. That later came sooner than planned. Colin sued, claiming defamation based on Jordan's first article, as if truth had bruised him, and he wanted damages. The suit was frivolous but sticky, like sap. It threatened to pull Mara into depositions where lawyers could turn her life into a public archive. Daniel sent his legal cavalry. It felt like a war you win by being tired longer than the other side. On the morning of the first hearing, Mara stood on the courthouse steps, granite hard under shoes that were not built for battle. Jordan appeared, recorder in pocket but off. "You okay?" she asked. "No," Mara said, "but I'm ready." Daniel arrived with a face that had learned a new kind of calm. He did not take her hand. He stood close enough to borrow her courage by osmosis, and not so close that the cameras, leaning like vultures, could knit a narrative from their angles. Inside, the judge had no patience for theater. Colin's lawyer performed anyway, underlining phrases like media manipulation and character assassination. Mara's lawyer, stubborn and magnificent, quoted the memo, the policy changes, the security reports, the text message from the burner phone. The judge dismissed the suit with a weariness that suggested he had a daughter who had been gaslit and a mother who had made him practice listening. Outside, microphones. Jordan's eyes, bright with a kind of human victory, asked a question she didn't need to say aloud. What now? Mara looked into the lenses and decided to spend a little of herself on something that mattered. Some of us have exes who are not adversaries but habits, she said, voice steady. We break them by believing ourselves. The law helps, friends help, money helps. But mostly we have to choose not to be smaller on purpose. A murmur moved through the crowd, the kind that means a sentence found a home. Daniel looked at her like a man who had found water. She did not look back because you cannot drink and talk at the same time. That night, on the park bench, she said it. I love you, she told him simply, as if telling him the weather. But I will leave if you become a room that asks me to be someone else. He closed his eyes like a person receiving a sacrament, and then opened them with a softness that hurt. I love you, he said, and I will build rooms where both of us fit. Gus sneezed, again at the exact right time. The city went on being itself. Redemption sounds like a church word. In practice, it was an inbox full of PDFs, new processes, signed. It was engineers' names under ship notes. It was a check to the legal aid network, public and boring and big. It was a former PR chief quietly barred from any future contract. It was a man with too much money bringing coffee over at 7 a.m. because he knew she had a midterm and couldn't afford to lose 20 minutes to a line. It was also messy. They fought. Once, about a dinner where he gave a bland answer about antitrust because being interesting might cost him leverage. She told him the blandness tasted like cowardice. He told her leverage fed people. She told him the machine was a hungry god he didn't have to worship anymore. He didn't talk to her for 2 hours. Then he showed up at her door with a printout of a schedule with real changes and said, You were right about the god. They fought about her fear. She woke, certain one morning that he would leave because men with choices leave when they sense a dependence they can't control. He said, I don't need to control your dependence. I need you to tell me when it's happening so we can feed your independence together. She said, That's the most corporate sentence you've ever made sound like love. He laughed, then cried in a way that made her love him more. They visited Houston. Her sister B made enchiladas and did not stop scrutinizing Daniel until Gus, yes, he traveled well, sat on his foot and claimed him as territory. Daniel washed dishes in B's sink, which had a chip that had been there since 2004, and asked about the school fundraiser like a person who understood that $1,000 can be a miracle. Bea nodded once at Mara when he wasn't looking, a sister's blessing that functions as a civic permit. They handled press like weather. Acknowledged, prepared for, never worshipped. When Jordan asked for a third interview, this time on the record, they gave it. Together. The piece landed with the grace of something earned. The billionaire and the woman who said no. Policy, power, and the price of slow love. The comments were still messy, because humans are, but the ratio of thoughtful to cruel was higher than Mara had expected from the internet. Colin receded, as men do when the stage light slides. He took a job that paid less but did not require him to keep losing to a better narrative. The restraining order stayed pinned behind glass in a clerk's office, and in Mara's mind, as a reminder that paper can protect. On the anniversary of the Grand Central Hug, dates are an honest magic, they went back. The terminal smelled like warm metal and coffee. People hurried with faces that looked like math. Daniel took her to the same corridor with the bleach pretzel perfume and said, "Thank you for not pretending I saved you." "You didn't," she said, smiling. "You gave me a ride. I saved me." He nodded. "And then you saved me from pretending that rides count as rescues." They stood under the noise a while. He reached for her hand the way you do when you stop thinking about reaching. No cameras, no plan. Just two people who had learned to be people near each other without turning into roles. "Do you ever think about the baseball cap version?" he asked. "I live there when I need air," she said. "Gus drops a ball. You apologize for his pushiness. I correct your apology. We talk about jazz. We remember to buy coffee." "We did buy coffee," he said, lifting the bag. A joke that didn't need to be better to work. She laughed. They kissed, briefly, like breathing. A tourist nearly bumped into them and said, "Sorry?" like a benediction. Gus barked once, a punctuation mark that always gets the grammar right. They walked out into a city that had stopped being a machine and returned to being a habitat. Mara finished her degree and started counseling women who needed to hear themselves more than they needed advice. Daniel handed over the CEO job to a person who loved governance the way he loved engines and moved to chair, a title that meant he could nudge without nudging people into categories. He paid himself less and slept better. He built a scholarship fund with the legal aid network for people who wanted not to be saved, but to be supported while saving themselves. When they fought knowing how to apologize in the right key. When they celebrated, they did so with tacos on a curb in Queens, as often as with wine in rooms where napkins have ice cubes. They kept promises. They broke habits. They told the truth even when it threatened leverage. They made something like a life. On a morning that had the courtesy to be bright, Mara looked at him and thought, "I did not fall in love with a billionaire. I fell in love with a man who built rooms and then learned how to let light in." And she hugged him, unafraid of what a camera could do with love that had nothing to sell. If this story made you feel seen, or made you think about where power ends and people begin, don't keep it to yourself. Hit like, so the algorithm knows this is the kind of slow, messy love worth boosting. Share it with a friend who's navigating boundaries, breakups, or boardrooms, and maybe needs to hear that rescue is often just a ride, and redemption is receipts, not speeches. And if you want more grounded cinematic stories like this, Tangled Hearts, Real Cities, Human Stakes, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which moment hit hardest? Who surprised you? Drop a comment below. Be kind, be honest, be you. Thanks for spending time in Mara and Daniel's world. See you in the next chapter.